Good morning, everybody. All right, so my name's Jim Lane. I'm the Director of User Experience at ClearSpring Technologies, and my team works on AddThis.com, which is a sharing platform used on the web by publishers on their site. And today, so I'm here to talk about the platform and then also touch on what we've learned about sharing and sharing tools over the last 3.5 years or so. So let's see. So first up, what's AddThis? So AddThis is a sharing platform. It was founded in 2006 by a guy named Dom Varnerberg. It was acquired by ClearSpring in 2008. So we've been working on it for about 3.5 years or so. And our mission's pretty simple. We help publishers make their sites more socially engaging. We talk a lot about sharing, but also other tools like following and those sorts of things. At its core, AddThis is just a little piece of JavaScript and a little piece of HTML that publishers put on their pages, and then serves up sharing tools that they choose and can customize. And then we provide them with live analytics based on what their visitors have done, what they've shared, how they've shared it, where they've shared it, what services they used, and so on. And then for advertisers, and particularly large publishers who are also advertisers, we can also provide aggregated non-person identifying data back to help them optimize their site, optimize their advertising, and so on. So it's kind of a big circle. When we acquired AddThis, and this is just an example of a couple things they look like. This is a 32 by 32 icons, counters, which are super popular. You'll see like, tweet, Google+, share, for instance, counters. And then also this is an example of embedding into a Flash site where they've taken this interface. So when we acquired AddThis, it was on about, let's see, about 100,000? About 100,000 domains. And then we've grown a lot since then. So in the last 3.5 years, we're on about 12 million domains. We get about almost 3 billion views a day. And I bring up the numbers a couple reasons. One, the languages and the services, we'll talk about a little bit later. International usage, it varies a lot about what services. We talk a lot about Facebook and Twitter, but in other countries that changes a lot, depending on what people like to share to. And then with scale, we'll talk a lot about flexibility and how efficient the interface is. It's really important to publishers to have something that's really fast and performant, particularly at that kind of scale. So, what have we learned? We have publishers in all different kinds of sizes. Everything from TMZ, who's huge, to someone like me who gets this tiny little bit of blog traffic. And so the needs vary a lot across that spectrum of gigantic people and tiny people. There's some things we all have in common. Everybody wants more traffic. Everyone wants more people on their site. Basically easy installation. So I want to add sharing tool to my page. I want it to be super easy to do that. So here's a little piece of code, slap it on, it just works. I don't have to think about it. And then performance is really important. And there's things like we think about accessibility and things like that, but generally that's not really top of mind. Someone just wants a quick installation. And then as they get larger, the needs get a little different. For larger publishers, they really want to customize the experience. They want to see somewhat counters, somewhat icons, somewhat buttons. It varies a lot. They want something that's going to fit into their user experience, and so we've tried to provide as much flexibility in the user interface as possible to allow them to kind of create the sharing experience that fits into their site. Comprehensive reporting, again, the larger you get, the more important it is to understand how people are sharing your content, how they're engaging with your content, where they're coming from, who are they, what do they care about, what are their interests. One of the things we offer is both off-domain and on-domain interests of your users. So for instance, are they into sports, are they into entertainment, what do they like? And we can, because we're on the 12 million domains, we can aggregate together kind of an idea of who is this person, or more strictly their browser, and what do they care about. And that can be really, really valuable, especially the larger you are. Third-party UX, so sites like Facebook and Twitter Follow, Facebook's Like, have introduced these kind of little mini rich experiences around liking something. How many of your friends have liked it and that sort of thing. And publishers want to include that experience in their site. So they want to be able to show that little like experience people recognize as being Facebook and bring that little bit of Facebook into their site. That's something that we've seen publishers care a lot about. And then finally, again, the larger you get, opportunities to their own kind of promotion of their own content, and then also monetization of their content and circulation and that sort of thing. So a lot of different interests, some things in common, some things really different, and just generally more sophisticated the larger they get. And then, and I was at the F8 conference last year, and there was a lot of talk about sharing being serendipitous. And it's really been interesting watching sharing evolve. We started out with an AddThis. It was a little button that said share. And then we introduced icons so that you could see a Facebook icon and a Twitter icon and so on. And anywhere from, depending on the context, like 30% to even 100% increase in sharing. Because it's, oh, I recognize Facebook. I want to share it to my friends. Then we introduced 32 by 32 icons, so larger. Another 30% or more, depending on the context. So that idea of, I see it, I recognize it, oh, I could Facebook that to my friends, I could Google that, or I could LinkedIn that, or whatever, is really compelling to users. Another thing we've noticed, too, is the lines blurring between what services do for two reasons. One, people use services different ways and think about services different ways. So Dig, is Dig bookmarking, or is Dig saving, or is Dig sharing? Depends who you ask. And so it varies a lot, which is kind of really interesting kind of phenomenon. And then the other is the services themselves. So Facebook introduced as well. They've got recommending and liking, but they've also got image sharing, and they've also got all kinds of different actions that you can do. So that's been really interesting. Like the services themselves actually splitting up and doing different kinds of interactions. So if you want to Facebook something, that's great. How do you want to Facebook it? Well, there's 15 different ways. And then finally, internationally has been really interesting. So the breakdown of which countries like to share which ways is really fascinating. Print, surprisingly popular. So we actually offer print as an option and track it for publishers to see how many people like to print your stuff. And it's the number 4 service in the US, number 3 service in Germany, number 2 service in France. In France, it's 15% of their sharing is printing. It's a lot of paper. Go figure. And we just actually did it as just an experiment, like, hey, what about this? Let's see what happens. And it turned out to be wildly, wildly popular. So, design strategies. Let's see. So, probably the biggest thing we've tried to do is make it really, really easy to both really quickly get our tools into a publisher's page, but then also be able to customize that experience, particularly because there's so much interest in things like the third-party buttons and experiences. And it just, and just try to make that work as easily as possible. And then also provide a way for personalization to work both explicitly and passively. So, for instance, here, this is kind of a default experience. The list of services that are available, so you'd see this if you hover it over, is optimized by language. So in this case, I'm an English speaker. This is the English set. If you had your browser was locale for France, you'd have a different set of default services depending on what that country, how that country likes to share. If I then choose to share to a different service like Yammer, we just put it up at the beginning for you. So user doesn't have to do anything. This just works. The publisher doesn't have to configure this. And that kind of passive personalization has been really, really powerful. And then as this works, this would become bold, or this would become bold. And so we just bring them to the top, kind of very, very subtly call them out. It's not really say your services or your favorite services. We just put them first, and that's increased sharing a great deal just by primacy. And then you can go in and pick your favorite services. Also, our browser tools do the same thing. You can go in and select, I like this and this and this and nothing else. Most don't, generally speaking. Very, very, very few people actually actively personalize, but you can. Let's see. Data informed. So this is something that's been a lot of fun as a user experience guy for us. So we do a ton of testing and measuring. We measure everything, do a ton of testing. We tested the hover behavior. So like, should you click when you get that plus, or should you hover over it? Hovering is a 4x sharing increase. Huge, huge, huge increase in sharing. So obviously very popular for publishers, sometimes a mixed bag for end users. I told you about the buttons and the small icons and large icons, huge increase. We tested a bunch of the stuff for that. Within the menus themselves, to give you an example, font size, underlining, font color, shadow behind the menu, like a 32-cell A/B, wild multi-cell test. And anywhere 5 to 7% increase depending on which combination of factors. So little tiny differences can make a huge impact in the user experience, which is kind of cool to be able to test. And when you've got a really huge scale, you can do tests like that pretty quickly because there's just so much traffic coming in. So that's been really helpful to try to optimize the sharing interface. And then the last thing I'd say is just designing for growth. And this actually is maybe a little bit related to what you were just talking about, Paul. We developed a protocol called O-Exchange, which is a protocol for URL sharing and service discovery. And we use that in our platform. So all the services in the AddThis platform all use the O-Exchange, or are compatible with the O-Exchange protocol. And then we also crowdsourced our language database. So we have like 70-some languages. And we did that just by opening it up and letting our audience translate it for us. And so we get some really wild translations, which has been fantastic. And much better than Google Translate could have done for us, and less expensive than translation service. So that's allowed us to grow really, really fast. What else? Oh, this might be, I guess this would be kind of relevant to talking later on. One thing we did was we made registration optional. So you can come and grab code from AddThis. Don't have to register, don't have to provide an email address. And that allowed us to grow really, really quickly. And that increased, taking that away increased conversion 40%, which was a huge increase. It's presented some interesting challenges later when you actually want to reach out and talk to those people because you don't have any way to reach them. So that's kind of a different problem. But that was kind of interesting. And so then I guess last, I just wanted to mention these are a couple challenges that we talk a lot about. And then may or may not be relevant to some of the conversations we have today. I touched this one a little bit earlier. Balancing customization, personalization, and performance is a really huge challenge. Publishers want to create the experience they want to have. End users want to just share, have it be really, really easy and just work. Those are not all, sometimes those are in conflict with one another. So that's always kind of a challenge. And at the end of the day, it has to be fast. The user expects it to work and be easy and be fast. The publisher insists their pages be fast. And so performance and accessibility as well is really important. And then third-party services is a huge one. We have all these buttons. The newest one, Pinterest, just came out. We've added support. So now you have a pin it button, and there's a +1 button, and there's a like it button, and a recommend button, and a tweet and follow, and so on. It would be great to streamline that experience. On the flip side, publishers want the buttons. So that's interesting design challenge there. Privacy is always top of mind for us. That's always hugely important. And so that we talk a lot about the new EU opt-in for cooking, the regulations, is going to be a big topic of conversation. We're working on that right now. And then finally mobile, just because you're removed from the cookie space and so on, especially in Apple's iOS. So that's an interesting challenge too. So that's a little bit of a look into AddThis. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Go on.
Yeah.
So with web intents, you could have a share control in the browser, and so like up in your navigation bar or something, you click that to share, and then it goes off to whatever service. Does that worry you? Because then it's not in the page anymore.
Right. I don't think it's a good answer to that. I think it's early to say how all these different pieces will be able to talk to each other. Obviously, our core audience are publishers who are providing the content, and so they want to know how that content's performing. And so I think the question is, lots of smart people and creative people like all of you, we're all sitting here together, are thinking about ways of that audience is in this mix as well. How can we bring these pieces together and create?
Yeah, I think Andy came up with an interesting observation a while ago, which is that like the idea of metrics and measurement, like publishers being able to measure the response to an article or whatever, is something that might be hard to kind of carry over into web intents because it's kind of more private.
My experience is they're not so concerned. I don't know if this is echoed in your experience, but they're not necessarily so concerned with volumes, but who. They want to know the who does it, not so much the how many did it. Is that something that you've...
Well, I think it's both, and there's just different ways. There are just different ways to share. Like we have browser extensions for all of the major browsers, and some amount of sharing happens through those browsers, and so to some extent we can provide some telemetry back to publishers who shared that way because it's all still ultimately coming through us. So I don't think any of this necessarily yet precludes the systems working together. It's just a matter, I think, just balancing the needs of these various audiences we're talking about.
I think as far as the API goes and the design of it, we're moving towards having a way to suggest things, and that when you suggest things and the user the user's still involved with the selection of it, so it's something that may show up in the picker. Say, if you could still have your buttons, so that data point you gave about the 30% increase or whatever, when you see all the icons instead of just the share button, is saying, that's interesting. To take that away and go back to just the share button may not be best. It remains to be seen. But what if the integration with WebIntents, when you click on the icon Facebook, say, you still are using WebIntents behind the scene, you just suggest Facebook and that shows up at the top of the list, whatever. So the user is still getting what they want. And that's the most important thing.
That's something that I was interested in, that I picked up on, was this idea of discoverability and serendipity, and actually being presented with options.
And I suppose, in a way, I was kind of wrangling my brain around this while I was listening to Paul talk. I guess you could kind of think of it as three different parts to this. There's the actual transactional architecture, if you will. There's I like to share certain ways. How do you keep track of the ways I like to share? And then there's the user interface for how are those options then presented to me. And I think there's different ways to overlap and intersect on each of those areas. So it's a cool design problem.
Yeah, I think along that, at Mozilla we found that in some of our user studies, users have affinities to whatever their services are, right? Like Twitter, Facebook. So even if the site wants to suggest you use Facebook, a user who doesn't have Facebook and just does Google+, that's not a suggestion for them. So we really tried to find a share button that could incorporate that user's accounts without leaking that to the web page at the same time, because we were really worried about that privacy concern. So how do you make a share button that shows Facebook but that doesn't tell the Facebook, tell that website?
Right. There's also, I guess, kind of the psychology of if I'm sharing something, am I sharing it or am I Facebooking it? And those have become verbs. I Twittered it, I Facebooked it, I Google Plused it. It's like, okay, so that's kind of a different way of thinking about the names. So.
So we have we've been talking about whether things like save to Instapaper is a share or if it's a save.
Right.
Or does it matter?
Yeah, it depends on what the audience. If Instapaper implements save, people are going to implement the save to integrate with Instapaper, right?
Yeah.
To go back to your question, I was wondering if potentially, it's just a thought, that the API itself links into browser privacy controls. So if it becomes really important that publishers need analytics, then maybe there's some degree of a user being able to control, like, oh, they know I shared this on this because I get something back.
So the user volunteers their stats to some service.
It's just a thought. Like, if you were to get some serendipity back from it knowing that this is where you hang out and this is where your friends are, then maybe there's a trade-off to be made there by including some sort of privacy control.
I think at the moment, one of the things when we did an implementation of this was that from a user experience point of view, there was the one bit of the process, it was an e-shopping thing, where we went, hang on, the user's got no transparency around what we've just done. They didn't know that their share was going via your service. The users just thought they were clicking a Facebook button. But actually what they were doing was transacting this, they were being tracked, and that was then shareable. And that thing that you say is so valuable about, they also shared this page, this page, this page, this page, this page, way outside that site. Right. And the lack of transparency around that, because there's no other way of doing it, that's really interesting, that you could sort of blow it open and say, look, this is what we do. That's okay, but you get to decide how much of it you want to be visible.
So with the web intent side of things, is obviously the client and service don't really know, who invoked it, and then, what actually the user invoked at the same time. There's a post-result method that we were talking about where, if you're Twitter, you could volunteer to send, whether maybe it's like a public message, you could send back the actual URL to the public message via the post message. If it was a direct message, you might just say twitter.com, right? You might not actually do the full message. But at the same time, Twitter might just say, I never actually want to leak out the fact that this action's been completed on Twitter. But at the same time, it's like you'll be able to get the analytics from the fact that if we could work out the web intent system is of the actions that people invoked and when they completed them, and potentially the networks that they did it on as well. So there's the idea that you have your analytics, and the analytics is actually core to the big publishers. The theory is that web intent should never preclude that anyway. It's because you know you can still provide that widget and that kind of infrastructure on top. It's just that you have to work out how to do the analytics off the back of some of that as well. But there are these options available as well inside. But, we're not doing the analytics inside web intent. That's not the plan of it basically.
Okay, should
Any
we?
other questions before?
Yeah, we probably should skip on to our next speaker. Round of applause.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.